It's time for Cleared to Play. Take you inside the tent, get you updated on the latest injuries in the Bay. Proud to partner with UCSF Health on the segment and bring in Associate Professor of Orthopedic Surgery, Dr. Nirav Pandya, who is ready to go. You are listening to 95.7 The Game, KGMZ FM and HD1 San Francisco, always live in the free Odyssey app, Twitch and YouTube, powered by First NorCal Credit Union. Hey, Doc, what's up?
Good. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great. So, Steph Curry, come on. What'd you see the other night, and what do you think?
You know, when everyone was concerned about the fall, if you watch the video, it looks like he might have twisted his leg a little bit before he fell. And you worry about, obviously they're going to probably get an MRI. You worry if this is maybe a slight MCL injury. Typically when they say, oh, this is a sprain, it's not going to be that big of a deal. You're thinking of maybe a grade 1-ish, maybe 2-ish MCL. So not super concerned. I think it's obviously better to be cautious as the season is very early right now, but would love to hear a little bit more if they do get an MRI and what the actual diagnosis is. But that would be my guess, that it potentially is an MCL and doesn't sound too serious based on the report from Shams.
Well, we saw the sprained MCL years ago when he slipped on Lake Montejunas and his knee kind of semi-caved in. Is the MCL injury one that can be recurring? And if so, does the severity and the return to play become more elongated based on re-injury?
It absolutely does, yeah. When that ligament basically has stretched out and you don't get surgery, we know that there's some scar that is basically in that ligament, and there's some degree of stretching. You're more susceptible to have a secondary injury to that. So given the fact that if that ends up being the same thing and that's the area that's injured, you may potentially wait a little bit longer in terms of getting him back, because the last thing you want is the ligament stretches more, and then he goes back too early when that ligament isn't fully healed, and then you worry about it becoming a grade 3, which is then several weeks out, as opposed to kind of nipping in the bud early and keeping it something that could only be 7 to 10 days.
Doc, Trent Williams played through ankle injuries a couple of times in the past, and it didn't work out so well. This time it did. What did you see with regard to his play? Why do you think it was different?
I think, the things you look for is number one, was his agility good? He looked great. Number two, was he able to generate power? And I think potentially what they did this time was be a little bit more cautious in terms of getting him back. And even though maybe potentially a while back with a regular low ankle sprain, you'd be like, look, let's get you right back in right away. As opposed to this time, they're like, look, this is potentially a low ankle sprain, and you have this history of a high ankle sprain. Let's give you that extra time to make sure that your ankle is totally feeling stable, and you can do the things you need to do on the football field effectively. So whatever they did clearly worked out. You couldn't tell at all that he had an ankle injury. He was playing just like the Trent Williams that we've known. So very positive, and maybe it was a little bit more caution in terms of how they brought him back into the fold over the past couple of weeks.
And Deebo Samuel looked pretty spry with the shoulder injury, and turns out he also had a little bit of a knee issue that benefited by his time out based on the shoulder. Did you see him shying away from contact or anything else that you could perceive him coming back from injury?
Not at all. I mean, you would have no idea that he had this hairline fracture in his shoulder. Didn't seem to be shying away from contact. Clearly was able to catch the ball and be impactful. So yeah, pretty remarkable. Demonstrates how every fracture is different, and particularly if it's not in a very critical area. But you'd have no idea based on how he played and how he looked that there was any issue going on with his shoulder, which bodes well as the season goes on.
Doc Pandya with us. Hey, Doc, I want to apologize for my language right now, but Aaron Rodgers apparently says he's returning next month. What the F? Like, what the hell? What the hell is going on?
Yeah, all orthopedic surgeons are talking about this right now, and they're like, what did he get done? But I think really what you're looking at is if you look at when, tendons will heal, we know that pretty predictably at 3 months, which would be in that December timeframe he's coming to come back, the tendon's going to be healed. The question is, what's the risk of it tearing again, which is probably pretty high at 3 months, no matter what techniques you use and kind of what things you're putting in there. And then number two, which I think is the bigger question, is has he regained the strength everywhere else in his body? And, is he going to be effective? Is he going to injure something else? So could he potentially come back and play? I mean, yeah, he could get back on the field. Is he going to be effective? Probably not. And as he gets out there, is there a very high risk he could re-injure that again with, 39-year-old tissue? Absolutely very high. So I think a lot of this is a little bit of smoke screen, a little bit of kind of social media creating kind of controversy up in the air. He was just running, I think the report was 50% weight on a treadmill. So you can imagine you're going to go from running 50% of your body weight to playing in a month. Probably not going to work out too well. But, if an athlete understands the risks, they may go out there but I don't think the performance will be necessarily that good. particularly for the Jets.
Has there been an accelerated evolution in terms of the repair of the Achilles tendon, or is this maybe just an outlier in terms of a guy trying to push his way through what has been garden variety rehab and reconstruction?
Yeah, I think that the two big advances have been, the incisions that they use for Achilles surgery are much smaller. So what that means is that there's less disruption of the blood flow and everything you need to heal that Achilles. So I think, number one, that's kind of helped. Number two, how they're actually sewing it together. You can actually push rehab a little bit more. And I think Cam Akers is a realistic example, even though he tore the other side, of how you can push that rehab and potentially be back at 6 months so you don't have as much secondary muscle issue. And then third, after that, the only thing we don't know, because no one said how bad his tear was this potentially not a full tear? Was this a partial tear? Are there things about his case in particular that allow him to be this more aggressive in his rehab? So a lot of different factors, but, they haven't necessarily advanced scientifically that much. The rehab's pushed a little bit more, but it's still sewing together a tendon that is torn at the end of the day.
Hey, Doc, going back to the Warriors real quick, what do you think physically could potentially be going on with Andrew Wiggins, if anything?
Yeah, that's obviously a lot of people are questioning what's going on with this play. I mean, when you look at that costal cartilage, that rib cartilage injury that he had, in general, if you look at all of them, sometimes they take 8 to 12 weeks to fully heal, but sometimes that healing process can take up to 6 months. And that doesn't necessarily mean that an athlete is not out being able to play, but how does that impact his conditioning and training, over the summer? Was he not able to kind of necessarily train at the intensity he could because he was potentially having pain there? Or is that making him shy away from contact or do more explosive activities? So if you look kind of at his injury history, you wouldn't necessarily think the adductor issue that he had because he came back and played with that would be the issue. But that rib injury happened right at the end of the season, and he's still within that 6-month time frame for what you may potentially see with certain athletes. So that potentially could be something that limited his ability to get the training he needed to be effective, similar to what happened to Clay last year, where he didn't have that offseason in the first part of the season. There was a lot of struggle.
That's really interesting. That's something to keep an eye on for sure. Doc, great stuff as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Yep. Take care, guys. Yep.
Okay, there he is. Doc Pandya. The proceeding was sponsored by UCSF Health.